I'm just having my glass of water to get me ready.
Ciao bambini.
Good morning and welcome to our whole school assembly.
Hola!
Let's get some learning on.
Welcome to another day of home learning.
Tick-a-tock, what time is it?
It's time to feel the music.
So we're going to work out the volume of this ring roll.
And they're all over the floor.
I consist of 95% water.
We learn grammar through the coolest tool, music.
Super goed.
Godt arbejde i dag, Leo.
I just need to keep it up. I'm so proud of you. Well done.
Hello and welcome to using Chromebooks in a shared device environment. My name is Graham, and before I go on to the, sorry, I'm really confused there because I'm just hearing my own voice coming back to me, so I'm going to mute my screen and we'll start again. So I'd like you to introduce yourself, hopefully without the hiccups that I've just made. Post a message in the chat, let us know who you are. Let us know your job role and what you're looking to get out of this session. And while you're posting that, I will introduce myself in more detail, and I'll also bring in my colleague. So my name is Graham Bowman. I'm a Google certified trainer and innovator with Tablet Academy. And I've been working with Google for Education tools for many, many years. I'd say, I think 12 years now, maybe. Became a Google Certified Teacher, as it was called, in 2012, which is now the Google Certified Innovator Program. And then more recently, took on a role with Tablet Academy, delivering training and consultancy around Google tools and other technologies. I'll pass it over to my colleague now.
Hi everyone, wherever you are, pleasure to be here. It's Hardeep here alongside Graham from the Tablet Academy. As you might see my eyes flicking from one screen to the other, it's because I'm manning the comments and posts that come through. So please do feel free to keep putting your comments in or any questions, and we'll get them to Graham as soon as we can.
Excellent, thank you very much. So, as I mentioned, this session is all about using Chromebooks in a shared devices environment. So we're trying to give you some tips and some tricks and a little bit of insider knowledge to create this seamless experience for students and for teachers using Chromebooks. Age of students could be as young as year 1, year 2, or up to 16, or even further education. It's a very similar use case scenario. But what do I mean by a shared devices environment? So what we're talking about here is you're in a school, you're in a classroom, and you have access to some Chromebooks, but not enough Chromebooks that every single student has their own Chromebooks. That would be a one-to-one scenario. We're talking about the situation where you maybe have a trolley of Chromebooks that is wheeled around the school, and you can book it out within the school. Students can access that Chromebook for the lesson, and then that Chromebook goes off to be used by somebody else. Very common scenario, obviously less cost implications compared to a one-to-one scenario. The cost is usually covered by the school, so students and parents don't contribute to that program, whereas often with a one-to-one scheme they do. But in a shared devices system, those Chromebooks, as I said, can be used by many different people. So the student won't always get access to the same device, as in the exact same device. They might get the same type of model. They might get a different Chromebook. So it might be that in one lesson, you've got the Chromebooks out and the student logs in and uses that device. And then the next lesson, maybe the next day or the next week, the student gets a Chromebook, but it's from a different trolley with a different make and model of Chromebook. So those scenarios Because the Chrome OS is so flexible and designed for these situations, it allows students to log in and get access to all their settings and permissions. So we'll go into that in a lot more detail shortly. However, as you see, the bottom line here, it might not even be a Chromebook that the student gets access to. I know what you're thinking, shock horror, why would you not use a Chromebook in a classroom? But many schools, most schools, have a variety of different devices and computers in the school. So if a student's using a Chromebook in one lesson, they sign into Chrome, they get their bookmarks, they get their settings, they get accessibility features. In the next lesson, maybe that student signs into a Windows device or a Mac device. When they're signed into the Chrome browser, so if they're on the Windows operating system, but on the Chrome browser, once they sign in, many of those settings will follow through. So let's look at this in a bit more detail. We're going to look at a few different modes that you can place Chromebooks in. We're going to look at some of the settings that are recommended for shared devices. And we're also going to look at the way that different applications work in a shared device environment. So first of all, on the point of different modes. So this might be something that many people are not familiar with. I know that we've got a variety of people in the stream today. In the chat, I can see we've got some teachers, we've got a few network administrators that I know have joined. So there'd be people from different experiences and different understandings of how Google Workspace works and how Chromebooks fit into that as well. So in terms of the mode that the Chromebook is using, the most common situation, I don't know if there's an official word for this, but I've just called it user mode, where the user goes on and they sign in with the username and password, and that logs them into their Google account. There is, however, another mode that you can use on Chromebooks, which is called guest mode. And this requires no login at all from the user. I'll show you an example. I'm going to switch over to a Chromebook, which has just gone to sleep. Typical, there we are, it's just woken up. Hopefully that comes on the screen for you. Just a moment, there we are. So I've got my login screen here. I can select a user. However, if I don't want to sign in at the moment, I can click on Browse as Guest. And that then logs me into guest mode. You'll see a black screen on the stream because I've actually got a Chromebook connected to the computer that I'm presenting with, just so that I can move the Chromebook around and you'll still be able to see the screen, and you'll be able to see the login screen as well, which we can't show you from streaming directly from the Chromebook. So I'm now into guest mode. You'll notice it says very clearly you're browsing as a guest. So I can go to a web page. Maybe I'm going to go to Wikipedia and visit that web page. I agree, visit Wikipedia. Any browsing that I do in guest mode is not going to be saved on the Chromebook. It's not going to be saved to any account. You can apply settings to restrict what can be done in guest mode. So it's not just free access to the internet. You can still apply browsing restrictions and restricting particular types of websites and files that can be downloaded and that kind of thing to guest mode. But nothing gets saved. Any settings that are changed by the user. So for example, if you're not familiar with a Chromebook, we can click on the time at the bottom right, and we can go to settings and we can make some changes here. Any of these changes will not be saved as soon as I log out. So I'm going to click on exit guest. And then the next user comes along, they go to guest mode, and it just starts exactly the same as it was when I signed in to guest mode. So that's one way that Chromebooks can be used in a shared environment. However, we don't generally recommend that for usual classroom situations. The main reason being is that the students can't personalize that experience to them, and I'll go into more of that within this session. And also it gives the students more of a feeling that they're not being watched because it doesn't save their history. Although, as I'm sure you're aware, if you're on a school network, then their activity will definitely be monitored. It's just that it's not necessarily very easy to identify the particular student that's accessing the machine at that time. So we definitely don't recommend that in a school situation, but it is something to be aware of if you've got something where you need a Chromebook to be used really, really quickly for one purpose. Maybe it's in a library environment and you want them to just be able to click browse as guest, access a website, and then exit guest again. So the next mode I've got on this list is called Kiosk mode. So let's imagine a scenario where you've got Chromebooks available for a very specific purpose. So this might be in a library where you have a library booking system and the Chromebook's just going to be used to book out books, to check out books, big fun. And students will use that device, they'll check out the book, but you don't want that Chromebook to be used for any other purposes. So this is where Kiosk mode is really, really good. It doesn't require users to sign in. It doesn't require users to visit a website. And I'll show you how this works. So just to clarify, I will be showing you a few of the Google admin settings. And the purpose of this is not to give you the kind of technical knowledge of how to apply these settings, but it's to make you aware that these settings are here and your admin, if that's not you, is able to change these things on managed Chromebooks. And that can then help you, whatever role that you're delivering within the school. If you are the admin, then you may well be aware of some of these settings already. So in the device settings, we've also got user settings, and we've also got app management settings. Within apps and extensions, we've got kiosks. So what I've done is I've added an app, as we call it. I wouldn't really refer to this as an app. It's actually just a Google form. I've added that by the URL with a link to a Google form, and that's been installed. I do have the option within the settings to actually auto load this library registration app. And you can do that on specific devices or a group of devices, or if you wanted to, all the devices. And obviously, usually it'd be a specific device or a specific few devices that you do this on. In this situation, I'm not going to actually force that to load. What I'm going to do is select that application from the home login screen. So I haven't logged into the Chromebook just yet. Click on Apps, and then the app will load. That then locks the Chromebook into this application. It will just take a few seconds to go in there. And anyone can come along now, put their ID in, put the barcode in. Maybe you've got a barcode scanner connected to the Chromebook by a USB cable. And then what action are we doing? So really, really simple. This is obviously not a real library system. It's just to demonstrate what can be done. You might have a professional paid for service that you use for a library, and that can be applied just as easily. Now, I need to actually get out of this kiosk mode. So as I mentioned before, in the settings, you can force that kiosk mode onto the Chromebook so that it can't be exited, can't be removed from the device. I have, now you'll see the black screen disappear. I've now closed that kiosk app and I'm back onto the login screen. Okay, so that's our 3 different modes to make you aware of. The first one, it will be the one that I'm using for the rest of this session. Guest mode and kiosk mode are the other 2 that might be applicable. Kiosk mode is also really useful in exam situations. So if you've got access to a exam system that you use where it might be a website that you want the students to visit, and then they go on there and they answer their questions, and that submits them directly to the exam board or to another service that you're using. But you don't want the students to be able to, for example, go onto Google and search for the answers, or load up their files where they've got their revision notes saved. Kiosk mode will lock them into that one website, and then they can only use that website that's been allowed. Okay, so I'm just going to pause here for a moment and bring in my colleague Hardeep to see if we've got any questions from the audience. Hardeep, do you want to just jump in there? Fantastic.
Yeah, hi Graham. Hi, everyone. You've had a great question about utilizing Chromebooks in a shared environment, multiple profiles being used on the same device and that taking up space. And will those profiles be deleted, or which one will be deleted once you've used up all your space? So that was a great question that was just put across. I'll put it up on the screen. And we've also answered. I'll get the support link also for Robert, who asked that question.
Oh, super. Thanks for that question, Robert. Yes, we'll definitely go into that. I think it's probably going to be very soon, maybe one of the next things that we go into here. So moving on in the session, we're going to look now at different settings for shared devices. Now, when we talk about settings, these settings, they are available to be changed on an organizational level. So we can apply settings to every single Chromebook that is managed by the organization, or a subset of Chromebooks. So it could be, classbook Chromebook Trolley 1, Chromebook Trolley 2, for example. One might be used by a particular department, for example, or where it can be broken down into smaller groups than that. So I'm going to talk to you about the device settings, which apply to the device regardless of who signed in. There's also user settings, which are set by the organization and forced upon the user. And that does depend on who signs into the Chromebook. So a Chromebook could be used by a staff member and then used by a student, and then the settings will be completely different depending on who signed in. There's also personal settings, which are also depending on the user, but maybe not set by the organization. So the organization has the ability to allow users to change some settings, and they will save for that user next time they come to a Chromebook, but they won't obviously apply to any other users. And we're also going to talk about some security features as well. So I mentioned a few times the idea of having your Chromebooks managed by the organization. And if this is something that you're not familiar with, the Chromebooks that you buy in a retail shop, for example, are pretty much the same as a Chromebook that you might buy from an educational supplier. Usually, if you go to a retailer, you might buy a very small quantity, probably one, maybe a couple. Whereas with a educational supplier, you might buy 30 or 100 or 500 Chromebooks at a time. Managing a large number of Chromebooks is very difficult if you do not have what we call a Chrome Education Upgrade. And this is a small license that allows you to register a Chromebook within the Google admin console. I say a small license. It's a relatively small cost. It's not insignificant. So it's definitely something you need to factor in. If you're looking at buying Chromebooks, then it's something that you need to budget in. And I would definitely 100% recommend it. I don't get paid anything for saying that. I'm not being sponsored for saying that. There are many Good for Education partners out there that will be able to organize the purchase of these Chrome Education upgrades. But the flexibility that it gives you and security features that are applied to the Chromebooks that you're managing is definitely 100% recommended. Okay, so let's look at some of these device settings that we can access when we have the Chrome Education upgrade. So one thing that I'm definitely going to recommend for Chromebooks in a shared environment, and you were probably thinking this already when you saw the home screen of this Chromebook, is at the moment this Chromebook is set to show username and pictures. So that's really useful if it's the same user coming in and signing in all the time. You've probably got something similar on your home computer. It just means that you click your name. So if Bart Simpson comes on, Bart Simpson clicks on their name. But I just realized I was clicking with the wrong mouse. If you're in an environment where that Chromebook's being used by lots of different people, then very quickly this list is going to get populated. It'd be a big list of different users, and then we're going to find their name, and then it's confusing, particularly for younger students. If they get there and their name's not there, then they might not realize that they have to go down and click on add a person, which is a little bit hidden away down there where they can then log in. So for a shared environment, what we recommend is that in the device settings for the particular Chromebooks that you're using, there is a section for sign in. So we're looking at the sign in settings at the moment. And then there's a setting which is called the sign in screen. So this one at the moment is saying always show usernames and photos. And then the opposite of that is never show usernames and photos. So that is to show passwords, so username and password fields. So I've just changed that setting and clicked on save, and then within seconds, I've not touched the Chromebook. It just automatically pulls down that setting and removes the picture password logins and asks me now to sign in with a username. The other thing that is really, really recommended when using Chromebooks, it probably applies really to both scenarios, whether you're using Chromebooks in a shared environment or one-to-one, is adding the domain to the end of the login field. So this domain that we're using is fairly short, but I know that some schools, they have quite a long email address. So it might be at students.St Mary's Science Academy.sheffield.sch.uk. So that's quite a lot for a student to type in, particularly if they're younger students, they might be a little bit slower at typing. So that can be added really easily from the admin console. And that is also a device setting, because at this point, the user hasn't signed in. So in our device settings, we can see the autocomplete domain setting here. It says username at, and then you can type in the domain name there. Now that doesn't prevent the user from signing in with another account. So for example, if I was to sign in graham@gmail.com, I just carry on typing the email address and it replaces the predefined domain and then lets me use that other email address. There are settings that you can apply to restrict that, so you actually can't sign in with any other domain, but in this situation, we haven't applied those settings, so this can be used on other domains. I'm going to put in my login details and click next, and then that will just go off and check my account, and then I'll be asked to put in my password. So I put in my password and sign in. And now the Chromebook is applying my settings from my organization in exactly the same way that you would in a one-to-one environment. I've got a tab that I was working on earlier open, so I can close that. And now I'm into the Chromebook. So we've covered picture or username password login. We've looked at the autofill domain. Once that user's signed in, a number of different settings will be applied. So for example, if you wanted to add bookmarks, they can be added to the student's sign-in account. There's also a really, really handy feature, which you may have noticed on the screen just here, which is that a sign out button appears. This might already be the case if you're using Chromebooks in your school. You might have seen that button already, but if you haven't, this really speeds up the process of signing out. Signing out, particularly for students that are new to Chromebooks, it might not be so obvious where you do that. So usually you would need to click on the clock, and then you can click on the sign out button from here. It just makes that step one obvious button that they need to click. Click on sign out, and that then gives them a notification that they're going to sign out within a few seconds. They can just close the lid and it will still sign them out. Okay, if they close the lid, it won't pause that timer, and it will just sign them out. There's also a setting that you can use that changes the action that happens when the lid is closed. So if I just switch over to my settings over here again, the search for lid, no, it's not found it. And there's a setting in there that we can apply what happens when that lid is closed, and that will then, for example, log the user off. You might change that to be shut down the device. There's a number of different things that you might want to do in a shared environment, which will be in response to the question that was asked by Robert. And that was about what happens to the files that are downloaded when a user's using the Chromebook. So the files, if I go into launcher over here, this is the launcher, the circle in the bottom corner, and click on the triangle, I can access the files app here. And this is very, simple file manager. I'm sure you'll be used to using file managers in whatever computer system you use. And in the download section, I've got a file here that I've downloaded previously, which is just an MP3 file. Now, if you can imagine students downloading files, they download maybe zip files, maybe audio files, video files that they're using for their coursework, their creative coursework, or their presentation that they're making. They can mount up, particularly if the Chromebook's being used heavily by various different users. So what happens is, over time, maybe the Chromebook's be used for 6 months or a year, the storage will eventually become full. Now, if the storage becomes full, as the storage becomes full, the Chromebook is going to start struggling to cope. So it will start to not be able to work as efficiently because it's got less space that it can move files around in. The students won't necessarily be able to download. If they try to download a large file, it just won't download because there's no space to store it. So what we highly, highly recommend is that in a shared device environment, that you change a setting so that those files get deleted from the Chromebook device, and any other cached files, so files where students have been working, for example, in Google Drive, when students are working on a presentation in slides, all those files are cached so they load much quicker. And next time you log into that Chromebook, the cache is still there. But if the students aren't going to always use the same Chromebook every time, then it's recommended that we just clear that cache and then allow other people to make use of the space. So we want to make sure that the device is cleared out after use. So we need to go into our device settings. I just completely forgot where that setting is. I'll find that one in a moment. So we'll come to some questions and I'll pull that out for you because it's really important that you get access to that. I'm going to go through some other things and I'll come back to them. I just tried to think as I was talking. I think the setting has disappeared from my memory for some reason. A couple of other things to mention. As you can see in this Chromebook, there are a number of different apps pinned across the bottom here. They're called pinned apps. And these can be applied by the organization. So the organization can choose some selected applications to pin to the bottom bar. They can also be added by users themselves. So when a user signs into the Chromebook, they get their individual pins. So it's a good idea from an organizational perspective that you don't just pin every single tool that the students might use. Use the key ones, and then other apps that students are going to use can still be found in the launcher. So if I click on the arrow here to open up the launcher in full, you'll see there that we've got more applications that can be used, but they're not all as easy to access as the bar at the bottom. Obviously not difficult to access, but the key ones you want students to access can be added to the shelf. It's also possible to install Android apps. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail shortly. But when the Chromebook is signed in by a user, any Android apps that have been force installed will download at the point that the student signs in. If they sign into the same Chromebook again, then it's already there. It doesn't need to download again. So if they're always using the same Chromebook every time, then it's great to leave it there. If they're not always necessarily going to use the same Chromebook, then the Chromebook's going to download that app for all the students at the same time when they're all logging in. And that can cause a negative impact on the school network and obviously in the lesson, because the students are waiting for those apps to download. So in a scenario where you're using shared Chromebooks, it's definitely recommended that you don't force install lots and lots of Android apps. 1 or 2 is possibly okay. Test it out, see how long it takes, see if it's a problem. It might be that you find that even one Android application downloading is going to cause you, delays in starting the lesson. So you might want to avoid that. But it's still possible for students to install those applications at the point that they want to use them. Okay. Let's just pause there and we'll see if there are any questions. Hardeep, do you want to jump in and bring anything up?
Hi, Graham. Yeah, we've had a couple of questions come through. We've got one from John. I'm not sure if I don't think you covered this, or you might have covered it, but I'm not sure if you gave the answer as quickly as you did. It was John's asking about settings for each user. Do the settings that you've been discussing have to be set for each device or for each user in the device settings option?
Can you just repeat that one again for me? Sorry, I completely wasn't listening. Can you just repeat that for me again?
No problem. It was as a question from John. I'll put it up on the screen. It was, do the settings that you've been discussing have to be set for each device or for each user? Or can they be for both?
Yeah. So it depends, basically. Some of the settings apply to a device, and those kind of settings are things that are applicable before a person signs in, or applicable regardless of who signs in. So I mentioned earlier the autofill the domain. It's on the login screen, the type of login screen that you see. There's also things around networks that you can access, whether the camera is accessible and things like that, that can be applied at a device level. The majority of the majority of settings that get applied are user-based, and they apply to any Chromebook that the user signs in. So this could be a Chromebook that's managed by the school. The student that's a part of the school signs in. They get those user settings, so they might be things like websites that they can access, or particular bookmarks that they get added automatically for them. Those settings also apply to that user if they sign in on another Chromebook device that's not managed by the school. So if they sign into their school account on their personal Chromebook that they use at home, that the parents bought them, for example, or another family member's Chromebook, or they sign into the browser on a Chrome browser on a Windows computer, for example, or on a Mac, then those settings get applied there as well. So I hope that answers your question. And also thank you to Robert for answering his own question about being able to clear those settings and files. So not the settings, clear the files that get stored up when users sign in. So for example, when Android applications are downloaded, and Robert mentioned there that it's, I can never say it, that's probably why I can't remember it, ephemeral mode. I just remember it as what happens when you log out. So thank you to Hardeep for posting the link to that support article, because I just could not remember the name of it. Fantastic. Okay. I mentioned that I think we've probably answered this part of presentation, there are lots and lots of settings available within the Google Admin Console that can be applied to users, and that customizes the experience. It allows the school to give flexibility to students, allow them to do things, but also restrict that experience so that they might not be tempted to do things that they shouldn't be doing, or completely block them from accessing particular websites and that kind of thing. What I find really useful about Chromebooks, and this applies to using Chromebooks in both a one-to-one and a shared environment, but the fact that this applies also to Chromebooks in a shared environment is fantastic, because the experience when a student collects that Chromebook and opens it up is pretty much identical every time they pick up a Chromebook. And as I said earlier, if they pick up a Chromebook that's a different brand, a different model, has different features, it might be touchscreen one day, it might be not a touchscreen the next day, the experience is going to be very similar. Obviously, they can't use the touchscreen on a non-touchscreen device, but they'll still get similar settings around the operating system and that kind of thing. So also that personalization, it makes that student feel like the device is working for them. They can change their settings, they can change the personalization to the desktop, for example, and they feel more connected to that Chromebook. And that can help them to look after the device in one sense. It also means that they might be able to work more quickly because they don't have to change their settings every time they're logging in. So let's have a look at a few of those. And switch over back to the Chromebook. So the way that you access settings, I did mention this a little bit earlier, is that you click on the clock at the bottom right-hand corner, and then you can go to settings. And then from there, we can see various settings that we've got access to. Now, it is possible in the admin console to restrict some of these settings. So, for example, you might want to restrict what networks students can connect to. And it could be set that you have a specific network that students connect to and a different one for staff. And that can be restricted in here. You might allow or restrict access to Bluetooth devices. So if the school finds that students are connecting to their phones, then that gets blocked if you wanted it to. We've also got some personalization here. So I mentioned you can change the wallpaper, change what happens with your apps. All these settings will apply regardless of what device you're connected to. Something else that I find really, really important when you're using Chromebooks with students is the accessibility features. And they can be accessed through a link by clicking on the clock and then going to accessibility. If you don't have accessibility available there, you guessed it, that's a setting. So this is something that can be turned on and off by the admin. And it's one that I generally recommend to schools that you enable that feature so that students can access these settings really, really easily. They can still be accessed without having it available in this panel, but it just means that students can access that really, really easily. You can even, with the Google Admin Console, you can even restrict what settings they have available. So when I click on accessibility, you can, for example, disable the select to speak option. And what that option does is it allows a student to click on some text on a web page or click on part of the interface, and it will read out that information. Obviously, that's designed initially for people who are not able to see. However, it's also useful for young students that are learning to read. They might click on some text in the story and the computer will read to them and they can read along at the same time. I know that feature is sometimes abused by students. From personal experience of teaching in the classroom, students will find that and then they'll just set the Chromebook to start reading everything out. Now, the great thing about this, the idea that this is built into the user settings, is that only affects that one student. So if they do go on here and turn that setting on, that's only going to turn it on for them. It's not going to turn it on for the next person that uses that Chromebook. But as I mentioned before, it can be turned off on a organizational level, and then it could be enabled for specific students if it's required. We've also got dictation available. So for example, if I go into Google Docs and just start up a new blank document, we can use the dictation from the accessibility features and turn on dictation. When I select dictation, I get a button that pops up at the bottom here. So this is my dictation button. And if I click that, I'm now dictating to the Chromebook, and that is then displayed in whatever document I'm working in, full stop. Click the microphone again, and that then stops recording. Now you notice when I said the word full stop, it did put in a full stop initially and then changed it to the words full and stop. I would generally recommend, if you're going to be doing any kind of long, writing paragraphs, long dictation, then the dictation built into Google Docs is generally more effective at giving you the correct grammar and the correct spelling of words. You're picking up the correct version of the word, and that is available in Tools, Voice Typing. So once you've done that, you can click on the microphone. Now I'm talking to Google Docs using the voice typing mode, full stop. So that time it understood the full stop was to do with my sentence and not the words. So that's ways that you can use dictation. And once that dictation tool is enabled, if you sign out of the Chromebook, go onto another Chromebook in your shared environment, sign in again, that microphone for the dictation is still there. We've also got some other neat features in the accessibility area. So for example, you could have a magnifier. So for students that have reduced vision, they can use that to see an enlarged version of what they're on their page. And that can really help. I've seen this used many times in classrooms where students find the text difficult to read, and they don't want to change the size of their font, which they could do. You could make that larger to make it legible, but then that's obviously going to impact the text on the page. So using this magnifying dock allows the students to read without affecting the document. So to turn that off, go back to accessibility features and turn off dictation. I'm going to turn off the magnifier. And one other accessibility feature that I'll just mention is to highlight the mouse cursor. And again, this is useful for students to be able to see where their mouse cursor is if they've got reduced vision. So that puts the red ring around and often used with presenters who are demonstrating where the cursor is, making it more visible. So let's go to accessibility and switch that one off. Okay, just going to pause there and come back to Hardeep and see if we've got any more questions come through. Anything coming in so far, Hardeep?
No, hi Graham. No, I think everything's been answered so far. A couple of other people have joined, which have said hello in the chat area. So hello to everyone who's joined. But yeah, I think that's everything done. And I think the pronunciation was ephemeral.
Ephemeral.
I learned about it on a marketing course, talking about it's
it's
something that lasts a very short space of time. And I remember it from a marketing course talking about social media, because certain stories and things like that, they're called ephemeral content because they last only a short amount of time. So there you go, everyone.
every day
It's
school day.
a new word of the day. So thank you, Robert, for that.
Super. Okay, so just going to go and talk into a little bit more about the security aspect. Now, when you have Chromebooks so let's say, for example, a student buys a Chromebook and brings it into the school, generally students will look after that device much more than if the device is owned by the school. If you have a one-to-one scheme where maybe the student part owns the device, or even the school buys that device for the student, but the student uses that Chromebook all of the time, no one else uses it, then also the student will look after it because that's the Chromebook that they use, and if they lose that one, then they don't have a Chromebook to use. In a situation where you're sharing Chromebooks, they put it back into the trolley, often Chromebooks are not looked after quite so well. It might be that a student takes a Chromebook to use, and they go and work out in a shared space. You might have a communal area, or they might go off to the library to do some work, and they're doing their research, typing up their document. The bell goes, oh, it's break time, that's it, I'm done, I'm going to play football. And then they just close the laptop, leave it on the table, and off they go. So in that situation, you might misplace that Chromebook. It might be that the librarian comes along, picks up the Chromebook and says, oh, someone's left this Chromebook here, and puts it back into the library's Chromebook bank, when actually that came from a department Chromebook bank. So situations like that not necessarily can be avoided, but we can work around to recover that Chromebook from where it is and get it back. There's also a situation where a Chromebook might be maliciously misplaced or stolen from the school. Student takes it home, passes it on to somebody else, maybe even for a cost, maybe sold online. Because the device is managed by the organization has control over that device, and we can disable the device. So I'm going to show you an example, and I'm going to go into the admin console. We can go to the devices and find the specific device, which I've done already, that I've got next to me, and we can disable that device. When I click on disable, I need to put my password in again. Typical. If you've ever used the Google Admin Console, it's always asking you for your password, which is obviously for a very good reason, because there's a lot of power in that admin console. But when you're giving a presentation, it can be a little bit annoying. Okay, so I found that device again, and I click on disable. I've got two options. One is to disable the device and block its use. And the other is to disable the device and completely wipe it. So no personal information is left on the device. Everything's deleted. In that situation, the Chromebook would restart and be presented as if it was a brand new device. Now, there is some information in here as well that it recommends that you enable something called force re-enrollment, which would then make sure that that device gets enrolled back into the organization's pool, if you like. Is managed by the organization, so all those settings get applied, but the personal information from the users has been wiped, so it can't be recovered by anybody that gets access to the device. I don't want to do that just now. I just want to disable the device. And there's a message that we've got here. This one can be changed as well. Please return the device to the IT help desk. Now, depending on where this device has gone missing, if it's gone missing and you believe it's still in the school, then a message like this would be brilliant, because it means the device is in the wrong place in the school. We need to get it back to where it should be. So send it to the IT help desk and they can sort it out, or send it to a specific teacher. If that device you think has gone home, then you might want to put in there the address and phone number of how to get that device back to the school. If the device isn't returned to the school, then the device can't be used. It's essentially a heavy paperweight. So just switching back to the Chromebook screen. Again, I haven't touched the Chromebook. That happened automatically. I was signed into it at the time, but now the device is locked, and we get the message that was applied there. Please return this device to the IT help desk. So if in the first example I gave, the device has gone to the library, it shouldn't be in the library, it should be in one of the departments. That now can be returned to the IT help desk. They can realize what's happened. Okay, well, now enable the device and pass it back to the right place that it should be. So it's really simple, re-enable, and then that device then, at the moment it's locked, a few seconds later, that will get unlocked and allow me to sign in again. It will have signed me out, so that whoever gets their hands onto the Chromebook won't be able to get to that user's account. So I'd need to sign in again, and then it can be used by anybody else in the shared pool. So I'm just going to sign into that again. and put in the password. Enter. So that's a bit about security. I talked about guest mode earlier. So guest mode is where you allow people to sign in not using an account. Highly recommend that if you're in a school situation where you've got a bank of Chromebooks being used in a classroom, that you disable guest mode. Also, something that's worth considering is multiple sign-in access. So this is where on a Chromebook, you're signed into the account that you signed into the Chromebook with. So for example, I signed in with my graham.bowman@g.tabletacademy.org account. Google actually allows you to sign into more than one account at the same time. So this is the website that's allowing me to do that. I can only sign into the Chromebook with one account. I can't sign into a Chromebook with multiple accounts, but I can add another account to use within the browser. So for example, I could access 2 different Google Drives at once, or I could access documents from 2 different users and share them with each other. But in a school situation, you might not want to allow that, because one student might sign in. They might then pass the Chromebook to somebody else and say, oh, you sign into this Chromebook, give them that screen, and then they sign in. That then gives the first person, the person who signed to the Chromebook, access to the second person's account. And if they don't sign out, then that will keep their account logged in. So it's highly recommended that you don't allow that unless there's a specific scenario where you need to use that. For example, if you've got accounts in 2 different domains where a single student might need to access those, or a student might be completing work experience, for example, and they need to be able to access a Google account from another organization, but still also be signed into their school-based account. Okay, let's talk about applications. If there's any more questions that come up, Hardy, just jump in. I won't stop for you, and just jump in and let me know that there's a question there if anything comes in. So in terms of applications, there are different types of applications that you can use on the Chromebook. When we think of apps, the kind of traditional sense of an app, it might be something that you install like on a tablet or a mobile phone. You install that application from a store, you tap on it and it opens up. On a Chromebook, those kind of applications are available. There's also a different type of application which is much simpler, and that's a web app. So this is basically just a shortcut with a fancy picture. And these can be really effective on Chromebooks because they don't take time to download. The students can click it and access the application really quickly, and it doesn't use up too many resources on the Chromebook. Particularly in a shared environment, web apps are brilliant. So I'll switch back over to the Chromebook, and I can go to my launcher, pop up the arrow there to see all my apps. And I've got a number of different apps here. Some of them are installed onto the Chromebook. Some of them are just web apps, and they don't look any different at this point. Most of these apps have been applied at the organization level. So the organization, the school has forced these apps onto the student, but it's also possible for students to add apps if the organization allows them to. So I've got one here, for example, Scratch. This is a web app. I click it, it opens up the website in a window. I can then click on create and start creating a project in Scratch. You notice it doesn't look like the usual Chrome browser. It is possible to make it open in the Chrome browser, or you can have it open its own window like this. We've got the 3 dots here, which is similar to the settings within the Chrome browser, but not everything is available there. But you could make it full screen, for example, and then use that application. It feels very much like a native application, but it's all based on the web. So let's close that application. So that is an example of a web app. It's also possible to install Android apps. These are applications that come from the Google Play Store, and most Chromebooks are able to install Android apps. I say most, I think it's every Chromebook since the year 2019, I think. Everything that's been released since the year 2019 for definite, and lots of Chromebooks before that you're able to install Android apps onto. When we talk about Android apps, often with teachers, the idea of students using apps from the Google Play Store is scary, because there's so many apps on there and lots of them are not appropriate for students. Many of them are games or inappropriate content. With apps on a Chromebook, it's not possible to access the whole Google Play Store. It's only possible to access the apps that are made available by the Google admin. So when I go to the Play Store on a Chromebook, so I've clicked on
Graham, we've got a
Play Store.
question. You asked me to jump in. when the
Yeah,
question
just jump
comes
in, go for it.
There's a question from Robert. I'll stick it up on the screen.
Hello.
Sorry, that's from somebody saying hello. That's somebody else, but hello back to you anyway. Here we go. Here it is. Is it possible to allow signing only from a specific domain? Now, I wonder if this question is about logging into the Chrome via a certain email address, but I'll hand over to you, Graham.
Yes, it is. And again, that I'm just trying to think where it is. Usually the answer to this question for me comes from a Google search. Autocomplete domain, it's not there, is it?
Because I know from a Chromebook point of view, I've done it where on the Chromebook in the device settings, I've stopped certain people logging in if they don't have the correct or the assigned email address that I want them to use. So I just wonder, is that what the question was related to, Robert? Do you mean by a certain school account, a school email account?
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head the name of it. I will definitely find that out for you. It's definitely possible and generally recommended, because it prevents students from logging in using their Gmail accounts. So it might look like they're signed in doing schoolwork, but they've actually got access to all their personal things, which you might not want them to have access to. So I'll find that out and send that in a follow-up email. I'll send that to the general follow-up email so everybody's got access to that, and then obviously Robert will get access to that one as well. And I'm annoyed at myself that I can't remember the actual setting wording, and I'm sure 2 minutes after the session I'll find it, but it's just one of those. I don't want to waste your time at the moment. So let's get back to these applications, and we've got Android apps here. You notice that one has been installed. This is one that was force installed by the organization. We've also got two that are available. So for example, Science Journal. Fantastic application. And obviously you may remember this from when it was owned by Google. Google then stopped working on it and it was taken over by Arduino, very similar to how it was when it's Google Science Journal. The student can then, if they're using that, can go into install. That application gets downloaded onto the Chromebook and then they can use it. So if you imagine a scenario where you're using Chromebooks for a physics lesson, all you need to do is say, go onto Google Play, find the app that you want to use, Science Journal, press install, and then you might need to wait a few minutes while that downloads and installs. But what you don't have to do is wait a few minutes every single time that the student uses a Chromebook, regardless of whether you're going to use that app or not. So for most apps, it's generally recommended, don't force install it, but allow the install of that application. So that means that the students can go in and use that application when it's required. Okay, I'm just looking at the time. We were just about come up to time. I was going to mention one or two applications that will give you additional advantages when you use it on a Chromebook. One of those is Jamboard. Jamboard allows you to do things like auto draw or auto shape. So you draw a square and it changes your rough sketch of a square into a perfectly neat square. Or you draw a bicycle and it turns into a drawing of a bicycle, which is much neater. And the other example is Google Classroom. So in the Google Classroom app, you can annotate on a piece of work using the touchscreen of a Chromebook. That feature is not available in the Google Classroom website. But if you have the Google Classroom app installed as an Android app on the Chromebook, then you can use that feature. So again, it might be worth having that app available for students to download and install, but not force install it. So it's not installing on every Chromebook that they go to. The student can then choose to install the Classroom app. Then when the teacher wants them to use that annotation tool, they can instruct them to go to Classroom through the app and find the annotation tool that way. Those kind of things can be accessible really easy on the internet. Just do a search for Google Classroom annotation and you'll find things around that. If you've got any more follow-up questions, then do get in touch with us. Okay, just going to finish off by mentioning a few useful resources. The Google for Education events website, lots and lots of events have taken place remotely throughout this year. There are starting to become some in-person events, and you may have seen some advertised, you may have been to one maybe, where you have to do that weird thing of traveling and speaking to real people in front of you, and then, probably not shaking hands, but, being within close proximity of people, which for many people I know is still uncomfortable. So we've still got remote events happening throughout this year and into next year as well. So definitely go out and check that website if you haven't already. I'm presuming you have because you found this webinar. Also, if you're not aware of Teach from Anywhere, brilliant website, lots and lots of great resources on there. teachfromanywhere.google, not .google.com, just .google. And also the Teacher Centre. You may be working towards your Google for Education Certified Educator exams, level 1 or level 2. If you have been following the Teacher Centre, you'll know that the exams changed fairly recently, I think beginning of September. So there's no longer an interactive task or a series of interactive tasks. It's now all multiple choice, although the content that you're being examined on is the same. So you'll still need to know how to do those practical tasks. It's just that the way you show your knowledge of that is through answering multiple choice questions rather than doing the actions in a browser. A number of technical reasons related to that, but that's the situation. There's loads of more information about those exams on the Teacher Centre, courses that you can work through that give you those skills, and lots more tips and tricks that you can apply in your classroom. Okay, and if you wouldn't mind, it'd be great if you could give us some feedback. This link will take you to a Google form that you can send some information back to Google and to the team about the session. I hope you found it useful. That link will be posted into the chat in just a moment. That's bit.ly/secondary. I realize that the link is wrong because it doesn't relate to this session, but we'll make sure that the feedback gets there. I mean, it's the same questions every time anyway, so I'll make sure that form is updated for you to be able to access. And finally, just going to say a big thank you to everybody, and also thank you to my colleague Hardeep for manning the chat stream there and coming up with all the questions and posting some answers. Say goodbye, Hardeep. You just quit yourself.
Oh, here I am. Sorry, I was just saying it myself. Goodbye, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure. A great session, Graham.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. See you, everybody.